Not many people know this, but among the many insights left by Edgar Cayce, a specific detail has always caught the attention of researchers: morning habits. For Cayce, the way a person starts their day could determine, in the long run, the health of the body and mind. And this included what seemed like a harmless gesture, repeated by millions upon waking. According to him, certain morning practices not only overloaded the nervous system, but could also cause dangerous imbalances in blood circulation. Today, decades later, modern medical studies are beginning to confirm what Cayce was already warning about in symbolic language. There's a real risk hidden in certain habits upon waking, especially for those over 62. A risk that is directly linked to increased blood pressure and the possibility of a silent stroke. Cayce didn't speak in scientific terms as we know them today, but his recommendations pointed to simple care, such as respecting the body's rhythm when waking up and avoiding thermal shocks early in the morning. And it's precisely at this point that many go wrong. A glass of extremely ice-cold water ingested on an empty stomach can cause a sudden contraction of blood vessels, raising blood pressure dangerously. In older adults, this effect can be even more severe. The body needs time and a balanced temperature to adjust after resting. And if this content has helped you in any way, please consider subscribing and giving us a like. This helps us continue bringing reflections and information that truly matter. Although it may seem like an exaggeration to some, doctors and neurologists today recognize that sudden changes in circulation first thing in the morning can indeed trigger cases of stroke, especially in people with a history of hypertension, diabetes, or a sedentary lifestyle. The body, when emerging from a prolonged state of rest, is in a moment of transition, and forcing it to react with intense stimuli can be the trigger for something much more serious. Cayce, in his own way, already indicated that the first few minutes of the day should be about care, quiet, and adaptation. Today, this wisdom makes even more sense in light of what science reveals. The heart of an older person needs time to get into the rhythm of the day. After hours of sleep, the heart rate is lower, the vessels are less dilated, and blood pressure tends to fluctuate in the first few minutes after waking. When a factor like ice water is introduced, the body responds defensively. The vessels contract sharply to conserve internal heat, which raises blood pressure and can generate micro-lesions in the more fragile arteries. In younger people, the body tends to cope better with this impact. But after age 60, this type of shock can be the silent trigger for something bigger. Most cases of ischemic stroke start this way, with an apparently small external factor. Cayce saw the body as a delicate system that needed to be respected in every detail, including upon waking. It's not about fear, but about prevention, and this simple change can represent years more of quality life. Another relevant point is that, with advancing age, the body's thermal self-regulation becomes less efficient. What this means in practice is that the body takes longer to balance its internal temperature in the face of a cold or very hot stimulus. Cayce, in his readings, reinforced that balance was always the best path. And this included avoiding extremes of temperature, emotions, physical effort. Drinking water, yes, but at room temperature or slightly warm, respecting the state the body is in upon waking. In addition, he suggested that people create a small ritual upon waking. Sit on the bed for a few minutes, breathe deeply, stretch the body, and only then start the day. This approach, now called morning hygiene, is supported by modern medicine and significantly reduces cardiovascular risks. It's important to highlight that stroke or cerebrovascular accident rarely gives obvious prior signs. It often arises as a sudden, silent, and often devastating rupture. Cayce used to say that the body warns you, but you have to know how to listen. Small headaches upon waking, a feeling of tingling, blurred vision, or a slight imbalance upon getting up should not be ignored. These are subtle alerts, but together they can indicate circulatory overload. And when added to a wrong habit, like the shock of cold water, the risk is amplified. The problem isn't drinking water, but how you do it, and this is a simple change that anyone can apply in their daily life. Understanding this is to value not only what Cayce said, but what science has been reaffirming with data and results. Even those who have never had health problems may be exposed to this risk without knowing it. From age 62, the body undergoes transformations that are not always perceived clearly. The elasticity of the vessels decreases, the rhythm of circulation changes, and the heart begins to require more care in stressful situations. Drinking cold water first thing in the morning is, for the body, a form of stress. It may seem like an exaggeration, but there are countless reports of people who had their first stroke symptoms shortly after simple activities in the morning, such as getting up abruptly, taking a very hot shower, or ingesting cold liquids on an empty stomach. Cayce insisted that balance begins in the details, and it's at this point that his wisdom connects with modern discoveries. Ignoring small signs or insisting on automatic habits may seem convenient, but it can also be costly. A simple gesture, repeated every day, has the power to protect or compromise health in the long run. A relevant piece of data that reinforces this warning comes from recent studies published by cardiovascular health institutions. They show that the highest number of stroke occurrences happens in the first hours of the day, between 6 and 10 in the morning. This range coincides exactly with the moment when the body is coming out of rest and facing the first external stimuli. Cayce didn't have this data, but his intuitive perception of the body's natural rhythms led him to advise that waking up should always be gradual. He didn't speak of biological clocks, but he recommended listening to your own body. Today, modern medicine confirms that there's a natural peak of cortisol in the morning, which already raises blood pressure on its own. When you add to this the impact of a cold liquid, the effect can be amplified. Hence the importance of avoiding this type of stimulus so early, especially in those over 60. It's also important to remember that the habit of drinking cold water upon waking was popularized by health routines that don't consider the particularities of old age. Many of these tips arose based on practices of athletes or young adults whose metabolism reacts very differently. Cayce was always against applying generic rules to different bodies. He believed that each person should observe their own reactions, adapt their routine consciously, and never blindly follow fads. Bringing this perspective to the present day, the message remains current. What works for a 30-year-old can be risky for someone over 60. Drink water, yes, but with attention, respect for the body, and awareness of the moment. This is a small choice, but it reflects a more attentive and preventative lifestyle. Throughout his life, Edgar Cayce attended to thousands of people with diverse problems, from emotional issues to complex physical illnesses. In many cases, he emphasized that healing didn't depend only on medicines or external treatments, but on consistent habits that respected the nature of the body. Among these habits, the way of waking up and what was done in the first minutes of the day appeared frequently. For him, the body needed to be treated as a living system in transition, which doesn't accept abrupt changes well. Today, neuroscience confirms that the brain, upon waking, is still in a semi-active state, and sudden stimuli can generate exaggerated responses. In older people, this response may include dangerous elevations in blood pressure. A habit like drinking extremely cold water isn't just uncomfortable, it can be a real risk factor. Cayce already sensed this when proposing routines that involve gentleness, presence, and internal listening upon waking. Many older adults report that they aren't thirsty upon waking, but drink cold water out of habit, on the recommendation of others, or in the belief that it will speed up their metabolism. The problem is that this belief, although popular, doesn't hold up when placed before the physiology of aging. The digestive system becomes slower, thermal sensitivity decreases, and the ability to adapt to temperature shocks is reduced. By following generic advice without assessing your own conditions, the risk of imbalances increases. Cayce advised that each person should seek to understand their own body, and that true wisdom came from internal listening, not the blind repetition of habits. That's why today, when we talk about the simple gesture of drinking water, we're actually talking about attention, prevention, and commitment to one's own health. Small gestures, repeated consciously, build great results over the years. In addition, there's an emotional factor involved that can't be ignored. Cayce stated that the mental state upon waking directly influenced physical health. He recommended that, even before getting out of bed, a person cultivate calm and positive thoughts to prepare not only the body, but also the mind for the day. Modern medicine recognizes that morning stress can contribute to changes in blood pressure and heart rate, especially in older people. When this stress is added to an aggressive physical stimulus, such as a glass of cold water, the impact on the circulatory system can be even greater. Therefore, starting the day gently, with warm water, a deep breath, and a peaceful attitude, isn't just a symbolic ritual. It's a practical strategy based on both ancestral wisdom and scientific evidence. The body speaks, as Cayce said, and it's up to each one to learn to listen. Despite seeming like a small detail, changing this habit can generate a real and noticeable difference in daily well-being. People who replaced cold water with warm water upon waking report less dizziness, easier digestion, and even improved mood in the first hours of the day. This is because the body responds better to stimuli that respect its state of rest. Cayce, although he didn't use modern terms, already understood this principle. He said that the first hour of the day shaped all the others, and that any aggression to the system during this period would have greater repercussions. The idea of starting the day with haste, thermal shock, or excessive stimulation went against everything he recommended. And it's curious to note how science, many decades later, only confirms what was already intuited so clearly by him. The aging body asks for care, asks for time, and when this is respected, it responds with vitality and balance. Another important point is that replacing the cold water habit with a milder version doesn't require great efforts, expenses, or radical changes. It only takes awareness and consistency. By preparing the water at room temperature or slightly warmed and drinking it slowly, the digestive system is activated more naturally without forcing the circulatory mechanisms. This favors the absorption of nutrients at breakfast, reduces the risk of reflux, and protects the vessels from sudden pressures. Cayce was always a defender of functional simplicity. It's not exaggeration that heals, but balance. For him, health was the result of decisions repeated wisely, day after day. And by adopting this care upon waking, a kind of alliance with one's own body is initiated. A gentler relationship with time, with the internal rhythm, with one's own life story. After all, living well after 62 is possible, but it requires attention to detail. It's no coincidence that many of Cayce's teachings are being revisited by contemporary researchers. His way of seeing the human body as an integrated field of physical, emotional, and spiritual forces puts him ahead of his time. When he warned about the care needed upon waking, it wasn't by chance. It was because he understood that small acts, if poorly conducted, could have profound effects. Today, with the resources of modern medicine, it's possible to prove what was previously only intuition. The moment of waking is critical and deserves a conscious approach. The simple choice of avoiding cold water at this moment can represent fewer risks, more comfort, and greater quality of life. And it costs nothing. It only requires breaking with autopilot and taking responsibility for oneself. Health, as Cayce said, begins in invisible gestures, those that no one sees but that make all the difference. As the years advance, many believe that health problems are inevitable, as if they were a natural part of aging. But this idea, repeated for decades, doesn't hold up in the face of experience and science. Cayce said that aging isn't a sentence of decay, but a phase that requires another type of intelligence, the wisdom of self-care. When we understand that each small gesture can affect the way the body reacts to the world, we begin to choose more consciously. It's at this point that the morning habit gains importance. Replacing cold water with a more neutral option isn't a whim, it's an intelligent response to what the body asks for. For those over 62, this type of adjustment is like tuning a sensitive instrument. It's not about fear, but about respect for an organism that has already lived a lot, and that deserves to be treated with more delicacy and attention each new day. And this care doesn't need to be limited to the temperature of the water. The way the body is put into motion also makes a difference. Getting out of bed abruptly can cause a drop in blood pressure or imbalance. Cayce recommended that waking up should be slow. Sit on the bed, breathe deeply a few times, stretch the arms, move the feet. These simple gestures allow the body a safer transition from rest to activity. Modern medicine calls this progressive adaptation, and confirms its effectiveness in preventing dizziness, falls, and even fainting. For many, it seems like an exaggeration or a waste of time, but it's precisely this care that differentiates healthy aging from a process full of unnecessary risks. When we start to respect our own rhythm, the body responds with more energy, less pain, and a balance that is reflected throughout the entire day. In addition, there's a direct connection between these cares and autonomy in old age. When an older person understands that they can avoid many problems just by adjusting small habits, they regain a part of the control over their health. Cayce believed that the power of healing was within each one, and that true medicine began with conscious choices. By starting the day gently, with a glass of warm water and smooth movements, space is opened for a more stable routine, less vulnerable to sudden crises. It's not about eliminating all the risks of life, but about reducing what is within our reach. A stroke doesn't warn, but it's possible to reduce its chances with simple actions, and when this knowledge is shared, it gains strength, transforms lives, and spreads like a legacy. Health isn't just in the hospital, it's in the small details of the morning. It's curious to observe how so many relevant changes in health arise from almost invisible choices. No one comments on the temperature of the water first thing in the morning. We rarely see health professionals discussing this in quick consultations, but Cayce already taught that prevention begins where no one looks. He didn't make common diagnoses. He listened to the body symbolically, understanding that imbalance is installed first in habits. When a practice is repeated for years without being questioned, it becomes seen as natural, even if it's slowly undermining the stability of the organism. By getting up, ingesting cold water, and starting the day abruptly, many older adults are unknowingly activating a state of physiological alert. Blood pressure rises, the nervous system contracts, and the heart, which is already working harder, receives an unnecessary stimulus. Cayce wanted each person to be their own guardian, and this type of attention is a step in that direction. Another important aspect is the communication between generations. Many children or grandchildren, with the intention of helping, recommend routines based on their own experiences, without realizing that the body of an older person requires another approach. Drinking cold water may work for someone in their 30s, but it can represent a risk for someone over 60. Sharing this type of knowledge is essential. And it's here that Cayce also stands out. He believed in the transmission of knowledge, in gentle guidance, in the sharing of experiences based on listening. When we talk about this topic, we aren't promoting fear, but awareness. It's about alerting respectfully, giving voice to those who are aging, and showing that there are safer alternatives. Small routine changes can reduce hospitalizations, preserve autonomy, and improve quality of life. This is true care, the one that is born from understanding and transforms into daily attitude. For those over 62, the body speaks in other ways. The signals are no longer explosive as in youth, but subtle, almost silent. A slight discomfort upon waking, a pressure that varies, persistent tiredness. All these signals deserve attention. Cayce taught that the body holds its own wisdom, and that ignoring it is wasting the chance to live with more balance. That's why when we discuss a simple habit, such as the temperature of morning water, we are in fact talking about listening, about respect, about relearning to take care of oneself in a phase of life that demands presence and not haste. It's not necessary to change everything. Just start with one gesture, a glass of warm water, a slower awakening, a choice made consciously. That's where prevention lies. That's where Cayce, with his advanced vision in time, finds echo in the reality of those who wish to live longer and better. Longevity doesn't depend only on genetics or luck. It's built every day in silent decisions, in the simple rituals that we repeat without thinking. Cayce reminded us of this by emphasizing that the body is a reflection of what we cultivate inside and out. By replacing cold water with warm water, by waking up calmly, by listening to the small signs of our own body, we are taking a concrete step towards a safer and more balanced life. It's common to believe that health is reduced to medications and diagnoses, but the reality is that it starts long before that, in the choices made still inside the house upon waking. For those who have crossed decades of life, taking care of these details is also a way to honor one's own history. It's not about fear of the future, but about respect for the present. And when this care is assumed consciously, it transforms into freedom. Cayce said that health wasn't a destination, but a process, and each morning offers a new opportunity to restart this process with more attention. No matter the age, it's always possible to adjust what no longer serves, abandon what does harm, and adopt attitudes more aligned with what the body really needs. This type of active listening doesn't require great sacrifices, but a new look. Waking up slowly, breathing deeply, drinking warm water, and following the day with more presence are attitudes that fit into anyone's routine. And when done consistently, they build a new pattern of health. Cayce saw life as a cycle in motion, where each phase required a type of care. In maturity, this care is more internal, more attentive, more gentle, and perhaps for that reason, more powerful. Because it doesn't impose, it transforms. If this message made sense to you, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment with your experience. This helps us understand better what interests you and allows us to continue bringing reflections that really make a difference. Cayce taught us that knowledge is only useful when shared, and if this information can avoid a greater evil in someone's life, it will have fulfilled its role. Health, after all, begins in the details, but expands in community. And no one is too old to learn something new or change an old habit. The first step can be simple. It can start early tomorrow. It may be, who knows, in the way you choose to drink your first glass of water,